This has been kind of a good news, bad news week for me. I saw a note in the news earlier this week about the consequences of the flooding in Carolina involving ants. Ants are pretty remarkable creatures at flood control anyway. Nobody really pays any attention except for entomologists, the people who study bugs. But anthills have all kinds of flood control systems built into them, such that when an inundation occurs, the entrance to an anthill will be effectively closed off by mud, but they build the equivalent of inverted P-traps into their tunnels down into the living spaces of the anthill, such that the water can only go down so far when it hits that inverted P-trap and doesn't go back up and then back down, and therefore doesn't flood the anthill, assuming that it's an ordinary thunderstorm and not a thousand-year flood, not a deluge. So what happens to the anthills in a deluge? They form little islands floating on the surface of the water. They all coalesce together as a colony and form these islands that float on the water. In other words, the weight of the entire colony of ants is not sufficient, is sufficiently distributed across the water that the weight is not sufficient to break the surface tension of the water, and therefore they do not drown. They float. The whole colony, alive. Brilliant. Brilliant. And unprecedented in my experience. I'm sure the entomologists know about this because they would have seen it before, but nobody else knew about it. There is more to heaven and earth than is known to our philosophy, Horatio. The 10 most important words in philosophy are, I don't know, neither do you, and neither does anyone else. And that was just stunning and amazing to me. I was really delighted by that. Here, the ants have a way of surviving. And then later in the week, I ran across a academic study that seems to document that anthills are full of lazy bums. That the famed diligence of the worker ant is entirely a myth. That most ants are lazy slackers who only work when the boss is watching. And why would that be a surprise to any of us? We've all seen Marxism in action. I wrote a story called The Union Shuffle about the way that Marxism turns ordinary decent people into ugly, grasping, entitled bums. Marxism makes bums. Marxism turns everything into shit, but the thing that is worst about Marxism is that it takes human nobility and turns it into shit. Why would it be a surprise to us that Marxism doesn't even work for ants? We've had since Plato, Thomas More, and Karl Marx are the three great champions of the anthill as the model of human civilization. Plato's Republic, Thomas More's Utopia, and one slaughterhouse after another under the advice of Karl Marx. But these allegedly great minds from antiquity have attempted to cajole us and persuade us again and again and again that the anthill, the beehive, the specialized colony organism is the ideal way to organize humanity. This is very appealing to the elite caste, the philosopher king class, the ruling class. This is very appealing to them because they get to eat at everybody else's expense. But for the worker ants, all you can really hope for is an opportunity to loaf while nobody's watching. How sad is that, to become a loafer, to take the incredible gift of the human mind and turn it into a thing that pursues nothing but the opportunity to create new waste. This is Marxism in action. And the poor ants took their victory away from me by demonstrating that Marxism is uniformly moral poison, even among creatures who are much too primitive to have a moral philosophy. So then Kathleen drew my attention to another type of organism called dinoflagellates, so-called protozoa, which means I don't know, neither do you, and neither does anyone else. But they are aquatic creatures who bioluminesce, much like fireflies. And they create beautiful light displays in the water. And I'm really, truly amazingly beautiful, and so beautiful that, of course, some alleged capitalists came along and had to figure out a way to enslave these creatures, to turn them into so-called pets, that you can have a dinosaur-shaped, transparent toy that is filled with water and dinoflagellates that, when you shake it, will bioluminesce, so it will create interesting light displays in darkened or semi-darkened rooms, all at the price of capturing, enslaving, and exploiting these organisms who did absolutely no harm whatever, and whose only real crime was to draw attention to themselves with light. If they weren't making light, we'd leave them alone. And slavery, literally slavery, and it's exactly like the slavery that children impose upon fireflies, upon lightning bugs, and upon other um, insects when they're young, with the convenience and encouragement of adults. Sometimes the adults will lean on the children to manumit to free the slaves before bedtime, but invariably children will successfully fail to do that and keep the fireflies in their bedroom as a nightlight and wake up in the morning to a jar full of dead fireflies. Not just captured, not just enslaved, not just exploited, but exterminated. It's a small thing, and they're not self-aware. It doesn't really matter, and blah blah blah. You can make all kinds of excuses for this, but I don't. I am not a Benthamite in the sense that I am all too worried about the suffering that is inflicted upon the object of this kind of behavior, but I am very much an egoist in the sense that I worry about the damage, self-destruction that you inflict upon yourself by doing that. In Meet the Third Thing, there's a clear implication that the domestication of animals is a moral evil. And I haven't been able to deal with that. I don't remember. I think I wrote Meet the Third Thing in 1995 or 1996. I wrote it a long time ago. And I've never been able to deal with that. One of the ways that I have of knowing whether or not people are paying attention is if they call attention to things like that. Why has nobody ever said, hey, Greg, the implication of what you're saying here is that domesticating animals is a no-no. No one's ever said that. No one's ever seen that. Some dumbass objectivist allegedly took that essay apart a long, long time ago. You can find it. noblesoul.com, I think, is where you can find it if you want to go find this alleged rebuttal of Meet the Third Thing. And it's not. It's just a reiteration of the arguments that Meet the Third Thing destroys. But no one has ever confronted me and said, hey, wait, Greg, domestication of animals seems to be a contradiction here. At least there's a snag. What are you doing about it? I don't know what to do about it. I think about it all the time. It really bothers me. Every time I think about what we have done to the, I think, 7 cats and 1 dog who live with us right now, snipped their genetic destiny, cut away their opportunity to reproduce. You want what's an organism for? An organism exists to make more organisms. What did we do? We deprived them of that. We brought them into our homes, provided them with a real good living, a real nice welfare state living, for these creatures who otherwise might not have been born, or had they been born, might have been coyote bait. And we take care of them, take them to the vet, keep them healthy, feed them lots of really good food. Kathleen worries incessantly about them and medicates them in all kinds of really elaborate ways. But the price of that is captivity, essentially enslavement, exploitation, and sterilization. For real. Call things for what they are. Call them by their true name. We sterilized our animals. Had we done that to human beings, we'd be in jail, and we deserve to be in jail. They're not human. They're not aware of what they've lost out on. They do not trundle off to therapy once a week to complain about having been involuntarily sterilized by the people who allegedly love them best. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the afternoon TV extravaganzas that they would have by interviewing pets and getting them to document all the ways in which they were abused by their allegedly loving owners? Nothing but bitching cats today all through the house. Apparently they've discovered that they've been robbed of their genetic destiny and they're not happy about it. But in any case, it really kind of annoyed me when she told me about these creatures who had never been enslaved before, and now all of a sudden they're being enslaved. Yeah, protozoa, they're single-celled organisms. They're essentially evanescent anyway, maybe possibly even ephemeral. Who knows how long they live? And Solitary, mean, nasty, brutish, and short, whatever you want to say, whatever utilitarian arguments you want to make about how inconsequential it is to enslave these organisms, nevertheless, they're being enslaved. They're being turned to human purposes. They're being diverted from their own purposes and turned to our purposes against their will, without their consent, and in a way that is strictly exploitative. There's no existential need for humanity to do this. You could argue that I need to kill that antelope in order to feed my family. I need to kill that wolf in order to keep him from killing the antelope population on which my family intends to subsist this winter. I need to put an ox collar on this oxen and use it as a draft animal on my farm because otherwise I will not be able to produce enough food to feed my family. I need to domesticate this dog as a hunting companion, as the thing that will flush the quail for me so that I can shoot them out of the sky with my arrows. These are all good survival-related reasons for justifying the domestication of animals or the slaughter of animals. There's no good justification for enslaving dinoflagellates. And Kathleen continues to tell me the backstory on the dinoflagellates, and we discover that their own survival strategy consists of being finks. They bioluminesce in order to illuminate the predators of their own predators. In other words, there are things that want to eat the dinoflagellates, and they don't have any real good way of defending themselves against those things. So what they do is they find the things that eat those things and illuminate those things so that their predators can see the predators that will eat them if they draw attention to themselves, and they run away from the dinoflagellates, from the dinner that's right there on the table and is advertising itself with bioluminescence. They run away from that in order not to be devoured themselves by even bigger predators. But it's a really finkish strategy. It's like having an ass-kissing relationship with the mafioso who runs the protection racket in your neighborhood. And so you feel free to be to exploit your neighbors because whenever any one of them comes after you with a baseball bat, you can go running for the Goomba and say, fuck with me, you fuck with him. These are finks. These are stooges. These are exactly like the stooges that existed in East Germany, Soviet Union, China today, in Cuba today, in the United States today. Finks, stooges, toadies. I can't think of enough ugly words to describe that kind of... And this is nature. I mean, it's not their fault. It's just a survival strategy in nature. It's certainly not the only one involving what would be morally objectionable behavior if we saw it in human beings. And yet, it doesn't justify their enslavement. I find their survival strategy really kind of disquieting, but it doesn't justify their enslavement. So I'm mourning the enslavement of the dinoflagellates. I really have to work hard to be a philosopher around here. And I go from that bad news to the real bad news in the world. We have a Huey Long, the kingfish, is running for president in the guise of Donald Trump, and should he actually be successful and win the election, he will immediately turn into Benito Mussolini. He will turn into a fat, needy, buffoonish, bullying dictator who will exist in the thrall of an even worse bully, in this case Vladimir Putin. That, as bad as Obama is at betraying American interests to Vladimir Putin, Trump will be that much worse because Trump is nothing but a balloon full of hot air. He's a bigger, louder, more belligerent bully than all the other bullies that he's running against for president, but Putin is a much better bully than Trump, and Putin will own him. Trump will be Putin's bitch. That's pretty bad news, ain't it? Wars and rumors of wars everywhere, wars that do not end, and we start new wars without ever ending the old wars, except that we never actually win any wars, and we just kind of lose slowly. Incandescents break up by distancing. Drivens break up by flight. Poof, they're gone. Sociables break up by reconciliation. They're never gone. The cautious break up by combat, by attempting to beat you into compliance. Not necessarily physically, but verbally and by means of putting you one down in every possible way, try to beat you into compliance. And the incandescent break up by fading away, by distancing themselves, by never returning that phone call. The United States is an incandescent warrior, and we are very showy about starting wars and very quiet about how we end them slowly and methodically by not returning phone calls. Literally happening in American foreign policy. American foreign policy not returning phone calls from its alleged allies in these stupid incessant wars. Well, now Putin has involved himself in Syria, and we may well have seen the beginning of World War III this week. I don't want to say one way or another. I hope it's not so, but this may have been the initial opening foray salvos in World War III. The economy is tanking, obviously. Watch the stock market performance over the last 30 days. Watch the hysterical ups and downs. This is a really good sign when you see a heart rhythm exhibiting the same kind of behavior. Good time to buy a greeting card. Good time to buy a bereavement card. Not saying that anything awful is going to happen right away, but whichever idiot gets elected president, whether or not we're in World War III, the fact is, if something can't go on forever, it won't. We've been writing bad checks for 100 years, and sooner or later they're gonna come due. Could be now. Not much to be cheerful about in that regard. And the fourth factor that I would cite as really amazingly bad news is the fact that the mainstream media is now completely, obviously, and without camouflage, working as the propaganda arm of the Uber state. That the so-called fourth estate, which is supposed to protect us from the other three, is just is by now a fifth column of the conspiracy to usurp American liberty and replace it with something much, much worse. Much, much worse. And the mainstream media is complicit in this, all but entirely, all but ubiquitously. It becomes more and more difficult to find out what's really true, what's really going on, because the people who should be unearthing the truth and reporting it to you are full-time paid professional liars for the Uber state. And that's really the sad thing, is that they're not even agents of the state. They are volunteers. They are volunteer stooges. They are finks much like the dinoflagellates, and they will be slaves much like the dinoflagellates. This is terrible news. Good news, bad news, and all of a sudden I got nothing but bad news. I'll give you worse news. School shooting last week. 2 shootings at schools yesterday. One in Arizona, one in Texas. Both were just fights. I mean, it's not the spree killing that we talk about in Oregon, in Carolina earlier this year, in Aurora, Colorado 3 years ago. These awful spree killings committed by underfathered, over-medicated, involuntarily celibate, universally rejected young men. The 2 events yesterday were not like that. But nevertheless, we've got a country full of young men, maybe a world full of young men, who are, to varying degrees, underfathered, over-medicated, involuntarily celibate, and universally rejected. And it made me wonder, these events as they come up one by one make me wonder, is the fatherlessness, the universal fatherlessness that has been sought by feminism since there has been feminism, divorce law, family law, undermining marriage, promotion of abortion, encouraging women to delay marriage and delay childbirth, encouraging young men to pursue women as prey to be caught and released, to be pumped and dumped, to be treated as nothing other than sperm receptacles. This is all a part of feminism. The ladies' auxiliary of Marxism, this is Marxism in action, is the ubiquitous fatherlessness sought by feminism, the MK-Ultraumatic. There are 3 jokes in there. MK-Ultra was the torture program of the CIA. It was a torture research program attempting to find out how far they could push people. The theory is, the conspiracy theory is that MK-Ultra was an assassination program also, training assassins. You can see this represented in the cinema, the movie Conspiracy Theory by Mel Gibson. I really miss Mel Gibson as a filmmaker because he would take on things like this. It doesn't matter if it's true. What matters is if it's interesting, if it makes a great story, and if it peels veils away from your eyes so that you can see the world better. I don't know that there is any assassination conspiracy in the CIA, but the MK Ultra theory and all of the things that go along with it, the events recur again and again and again, that we always get the full name, the Lee Harvey Oswald name, the full name of the killer when these events happen. Is the CIA or some organization like the CIA unleashing assassins on civil society in order to get people to clamor for more status control. This is what happens after each one of these events, is that we always have a whole bunch of really dumb people clamoring for enslaving people by taking away their ability to resist tyranny, by taking away their armaments. But MK-Ultraumatic, the second part of the joke is the word trauma. It's not TRA-matic, it's TRA-U-matic. And then the third joke is it, have they perfected the practice to create MK-Ultra-like assassins without having to do anything, explicitly to program them? In The Fountainhead, Ayn Rand has Ellsworth Toohey say, pulling weeds is an ugly job. Who wants to do that? What if you could just spread a certain fertilizer that would prevent those weeds from growing in the first place? Well, what if you could just spread a certain fertilizer that would take ordinary, wholesome, decent, young men and turn a significant fraction of them into time bombs, ticking time bombs who may go off at any minute? You take away their fathers, you pump them full of psychotropic drugs, you rob them of the opportunity to develop appropriate male leadership social skills so that the young women around them, over-sexualized young women, confronted by a vast cadre of sexually incompetent young men who are therefore involuntarily celibate. The women call them creeps and won't have anything to do with them. And hence, they are rejected by everyone. Everyone treats them with scorn and contempt and makes fun of them for living in mommy's basement and wearing their pajamas and playing video games all day. They scorn and scold them all the time and offer them no praise for their manifest virtues. These young men have incredible virtues, not the least of which is the ability to work like incredible dogs all day and all night because they're so young and so full of energy. But they have amazing virtues and amazing skills and incredible depth of knowledge. No one has anything good to say about these guys. They are universally rejected. Underfathered, over-medicated, involuntarily celibate, and universally rejected. And is that the MK-Ultraumatic? Are we seeing limited, restricted outlier events among young men who are particularly far over the edge, or are we just seeing the leading edge of a wave of insane, inexplicable violence brought to us by young men who have no other meaning in their lives and have no other way of drawing attention to themselves? Oh, my sweet suffering Jesus. I need better news. I have it. Yesterday, in a comment on Facebook, I wrote just a little bit of C as the comment. That's what I wrote, is just a little bit of C, and I don't even remember what I wrote, but it was essentially a very brief summarization of the moral philosophical argument made in Chapter 7 of Man Alive. No kidding. I wrote it as just a little line of code, and I realized that wasn't really thoroughly adequate. It wasn't a good algorithm, and so I sat down in Quark Express and wrote the algorithm as an illustration, and I had to go out for a few hours, and I realized that even then my logic wasn't correct. I fixed it this morning, put it up on the screen where you can see it. This is moral philosophy in one algorithm. If you are familiar with Carnahan and Ritchie C, if you can write C, or if you can write in any of the languages that have devolved from C, C++, Objective-C, PHP, Java, C#, there are others. Lots and lots of computer languages that basically use the K&RC syntax. If you can read K&RC, you can read this algorithm. But you don't really have to know how to read K&RC. If you can just read, you can read that while you have a self, while you are self-aware, while you are aware of the idea that I call a self. If you take that self and act appropriately toward it, if you love yourself, if you make your choices in such a way that you will admire them in the instant moment and admire them enduringly thereafter, if you love yourself will be augmented. And if you don't, your self will be diminished. This is the number line argument in Chapter 7 of Man Alive, expressed as an algorithm, and that is the complete argument of moral philosophy in a few lines of C-like code. Obviously, we have to initialize self as a variable if we're going to run this as software, and we're doing that in Chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 of Man Alive. We're initializing the self as a variable, and then explaining the process of loving yourself is done, Chapters 6 and 7 in particular, but later again in Chapters 9, 10, and 11 of Man Alive. But if you agree with my premises, then that illustration, that little algorithm, is all of moral philosophy expressed as one algorithm. And it's fun for me because earlier this week I posted a story that I wrote. I don't know. I think I wrote it in 1985. I put a date on it, but I really don't remember when I wrote it. And this is before Google Groups, before Deja News is what it was called when Google bought it, before there were any records of what was going on the internet. So I can't even go back in time and figure out when I wrote this thing. I have no idea when I wrote it, but right around spring of 1985, I know I wrote the story. And the story turns on a math joke. The joke is 0 equals question mark. 0 equals question mark. Anything means nothing. And I just thought it was funny. I used it as an illustration on a book of Willie stories that I produced at that time. I think there may be one copy of this book. I think I may have one copy out in my garage. That may be all that's left of this book. But I used it as a computer screen showing that equation. 0 equals question mark was the illustration for the cover of this book, the Book of Willie. And at the same time, I was writing a novel called Mantrap. And the driving syllogism in that book was a similar expression: 1 is greater than 0. That was it. I mean, you want to talk about how silly, I guess, or how simple my ideas are. That was the idea that drove the book Mantrap, and it really drove my thinking for the next 15 years or so. 1 is greater than 0. And then we get to the equation or the syllogism, I don't know what you call it, the expression that shows up in Man Alive. And I was working on that for quite a few years before I actually used it in Man Alive. That expression is 1 is greater than 0 is greater than minus 1. Again, it's stupid. I mean, just unbelievably obvious. But this is a way of understanding the number line in Chapter 7 through one iteration, through one inflection point, through one choice. And the algorithm that I put up on the screen is a way of understanding that relationship over and over and over again through every choice you make, the thousands of choices you make every day, the hundreds of thousands of choices that you make every week, the billions of choices that you make every year. That loop, that while loop, describes the entire process, how the process works over time, to the extent that you move incrementally and gradually toward splendor, or you move incrementally and gradually toward squalor. All of it in one simple algorithm. And so if you feel causes for despair this week or any week based on the mindless, meaningless, noisome news, take a moment to consider that we can encapsulate all of moral philosophy in one simple algorithm. This is the Church of Splendor. This is the kind of splendor that I'm working toward all the time. I need your help. And this is a church. You can tell it's a church because there's an offering plate. I almost never pass the offering plate because I never think of it. But I'm passing the offering plate now. I need help. I just delivered to you something that philosophy has been grailing for 5,000 years, a way of encapsulating and understanding moral philosophy at a glance. I can do way more than this, but I need your help. If you can pay me, pay me. If you can't pay me, find someone who can. Let's fund this church and make it bigger. Let's make it global. Let's talk to everybody. Let's show everybody how to love the fact of being alive, how to love to be a father, how to love to be a mother, how to love to raise a great and gorgeous family, how not to enslave organisms and make slavers of ourselves, make us the kind of people who exploit other organisms for no existential benefit whatever, for nothing but amusement. And good God, let us stop trying to be ants. Let's be free minds, in love with the idea of being even freer minds. My name is Greg Swan. I'm so glad you could join me. I'll talk to you again next week.